Welcome everyone to another edition to As Above, So Below Radio. I'm your host, Martin Hodgson, and it gives me great pleasure to have you tuning in today. When you get a chance, please visit the website holisticadvocate.com and sign up for a free newsletter. Also, take a moment to subscribe and become a member. You'll not only gain access to our commercial-free subscriber-based interviews, but also treat yourself to an assortment of fascinating people worth listening to. Today's guest is Patricia Awyan. Patricia is a teacher, lecturer, artist, and life counselor. Together with her husband, Yousef Awyan, they created the Khemit School of Ancient Mysticism, which focuses on relating the secrets, symbolism, and mysteries of the ancients to the shifting energies of our current reality. Join me in welcoming Patricia as she discusses Khemitology. Okay, Patricia, I'd like to give you a warm welcome to As Above, So Below Radio. Last time we spoke was about 2 years ago, and a lot of things have happened in Egypt. For anyone who's not fully familiar with what you do, can you give a brief explanation of your background and what really got you involved in the concept of Khemitology?
Well, I grew up on a farm in way out in the country in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and grew up out in nature with a father that was very connected to nature, and just my exploration of everything started at a very young age. And my attraction to Egypt began when I was looking through one of my dad's National Geographics and saw my first pictures of the pyramids and the temple walls, and immediately, even I must have been 7 or 8, I felt this deep connection to something that just seemed so much like home to me. And from that point forward, everything, I would always talk about Egypt, and I'm going to Egypt someday, and I'm going to the pyramids, and I'm going into the pyramids, and I would study about pyramid energy, and I became very interested in all the sciences, mathematics, physics, really later in life, more into the nature of our reality, and then of course anything having to do with Egypt, ancient technologies, which really exploded when I finally started coming to Egypt, and I chose my first tour to actually come and meet Hakim, who is my husband's father, was my husband. He passed in 2008. Mm-hmm. And he was, they presented him as the Star Elder, and when I read about him through Stephen Mailer's books, I was just totally, it was just seeing that everything that he taught or spoke about resonated with me, and things that I had always felt. And so I came to meet him and learn more, and just, you fell in love with Hakim. He was just the most amazing man, just genius. He just seemed to know everything about everything, and I just wanted and needed to know more.
Okay. Now, mind if I ask, what exactly did he share with you? Anything specifically geared to Egypt's ancient past? Any mysticism that he shared with you? Because it seems somehow that anyone who has an intimate knowledge of ancient Egypt really is reluctant to share that with the public, or with someone who's not, let's say, an initiate, so to speak.
Well, Hakim had a different view of everything. He did have, yes, that's a minor statement, but he did have university education. He went to university in Holland and here in Egypt. He had degrees. He was an Egyptologist. He was an archaeologist. But from a young age, he had explored the sites himself, and could, his own attraction began when he saw things and had questions about them. And then he went and studied these disciplines and came back, and he realized and saw that there is so much there that Egyptology, archaeology, history doesn't explain. It doesn't have answers for. Things you can see in plain sight with your own eyes. And the answers, they just don't add up. So, you know, his own study, I mean, he was in the field for 65 years. He worked as a tour guide for many, many years. And through that time, he not only had an indigenous connection with the keepers at the site and in his own family that were teaching these ancient teachings and passing down knowledge, but, you know, being at the site, being at the field, in the field, and using his own amazing keen intuition. You know, he actually presented a history of Egypt that makes more sense. Mm-hmm. Then especially if you come to Egypt and you see what we see, and you say, okay, that, you know, you can't explain that with Egyptology. Mm-hmm. And that's basically what Khemitology is. It takes a look at what Egyptology doesn't explain, it doesn't have answers for.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because I'm thinking that I think the ancient mysteries of Egypt are currently being shunned by most Egyptologists. It's like they don't want to touch on that. They want to focus more on the script, so to speak.
Well, I think the nature of being an Egyptologist, just the field itself, restricts you. If they were to start to delve or start to look into some of these mysteries, they would lose their funding. There is a, you know, academia seems to have this rigid restrictions that, you know, once they set a belief or a pattern, that you must stay within the pattern, which is wonderful about what we do because we don't have any restrictions. Good. There's nobody telling us we can or can't say something. And also remember that, you know, most of our major religions and historians say that civilization didn't start until, you know, 6,000 years ago. So we're looking at introducing something that's way off the charts, you know, that civilization cycles over and over and over again through golden and dark ages, and this could have happened, you know, for millions of years.
Right. Okay. Now, the last time we spoke, Egypt was undergoing a political and economic transition. How is the situation there?
Currently, it's not good on the political front. There is a lot of political conflict, and the media is covering this worldwide. Unfortunately, they're overblowing what's actually happening on the ground here in Egypt, because what we see, my lifestyle hasn't changed, but what we do see is nothing really has changed in Egypt, and this is what people are upset about. We see no change. There's no positive results from this people's revolution that had given people so much hope. And then, of course, there's the political games, the conflicts. There's things going on that, you know, that just aren't making anything better. Mm-hmm. And so, and it's also creating a lot of fear. And we see, you know, what I see here is once everything relaxes and the media leaves Egypt alone and the tourists start to come back, then we see something happen and there's a big explosion and a big media event, and, you know, I get letters again, are you safe, are you safe? And I keep saying nothing's changed, everything's the same. And most of this, what we feel, is orchestrated just to keep the people, you know, the people are suffering here. Tourism is way down and people are struggling just to survive, and I think in a way that keeps them in control.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, just out of curiosity here, for anyone who's new to this subject, Khemitology, and the whole purpose of the Khemit School of Ancient Mysticism school that both you and your husband organized there. Anyone who's new to the subject, what identifies your organization as unique than, say, booking a tour with an Egyptologist? You kind of hinted here that you were given some information from Mr. Awyan there before he passed on, but what really separates your organization from so many out there?
Well, as far as tours, we're not doing what we're doing to run tours. However, we discovered that people were coming to us, wanting us to teach at the sites. They wanted us to show them everything. And it just we were invited on several tours. And we discovered when we started working on these tours that we weren't able to teach the way we felt we needed to. And things were happening on the tours that weren't in alignment with what we wanted to present. So I guess it just kind of turned around that we thought, okay, maybe we should try and host some of our own tours. And we met a wonderful tour guide that was sort of feeling the same way, and we've teamed up and created something really wonderful. Now, we do have to have an Egyptologist on the tour. There has to be a tour guide, an official tour guide here in Egypt. Oh. However, on most tours, the people, the tour guides will take them out, and they literally have a spiel that they have to present to the people at each site, and it's the Egyptologist. It's all about, the site was built here. There's this many columns. There's this, and really not something I would be interested in, but it does serve a multitude or a population that is looking for that. However, what we offer is something totally unique and different. Although we have our Egyptologist tour guide with us, and he's amazing, also university educated, and grew up in a village here near Memphis, and with an absolute, the need to know that I think all of us here were born with. Mm-hmm. And so he studied everything, and he too saw things and had questions. And his university professors would say, shush, you can't ask questions, as you know, in this field. So anyway, we've teamed up with him, and we have, when we want the Egyptologist point of view, we have it. But we also, the three of us, are able to go and teach and show the unique things at the site that other Egyptologists and tour guides don't address. And these are the obvious, the ancient technologies that are right in your face. The fact that the pyramids were not built as tombs. They weren't built 4,000 years ago, but are much, much older. And the other things that set us apart is, our focus, although we don't discourage shopping, but we don't race people through the sites just so we can go to shopping venues. We actually give people more time. We go, we teach, we show. People have time to wander, to meditate, toning, resonance, these kind of things. We try and offer a platform for this. And then we also take people to unique areas that are oftentimes closed to the public. And that's kind of fun. And we really just have an amazing time with our groups.
Mm-hmm. So there's more of an hands-on experience for any tourist who wants to just visit Egypt and so forth. I mean, I'm saying this because some organizations, excuse me, they tend to rush the tourist into seeing the site, and so forth, whereas yours is more intimate, so to speak, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. There are sites that we get into areas where people can actually, see, touch, feel things that, other people don't even see on the tours. We go to sites that other people don't even go to on the tours. It's just another way of presenting the information. And because everybody knew and loved Hakim at the site, a lot of them recognized Yousef, and when they didn't think, that Yousef would introduce himself to some of Hakim's old friends at the site. So we've developed many relationships, and in Egypt, that just makes doors open everywhere. So when the keepers see us coming, and I say the keepers, these are the men from families that have been watching the sites for tens, if not hundreds of years, and they are always at the sites in Galabeas, and these are the guys that have the keys to unlock doors. And it just makes it a pleasure to be able to go and see and do things that you wouldn't do on a normal, everyday mainstream tour.
Okay, so let's just say that I'm a typical would-be tourist who wants to visit Egypt for the first time, and I decide to contact your organization, the school there. What would I expect to experience as someone who wants to explore the wonders of Egypt? Can you just give like a step-by-step illustration here for anyone who wants to really, let's say, go gung-ho there and just explore the wonders of ancient Egypt?
Well, we on our basic tours, and we're starting to offer some unique venues on other tours, other destinations. But on our regular tours, we take you to the sites that other tours take you to. Plus, we'll go to Abu Sharab and Abu Sir. We'll take you to places off the beaten path. We don't nickel and dime people. We free snacks, free water. We just want people to come and enjoy, relax. We take care of all the details. You know, a lot of people don't like tours, you know, where they go with big groups of people. But we really create like a bonded family atmosphere where everybody, you know, we're all in sync. We're flexible. The schedule is always open for change. Sometimes that's the best way to do things in Egypt, because schedules will happen, sometimes do change here in Egypt by flights or things like that. But we always have an alternative. We always have something fun and you know, off the beaten path to do. Mm-hmm. People can climb the pyramids at Abu Sir. They can, meditation's another thing. Meditation is strictly forbidden. And this is something we try and make room for at many of the sites. It's not something I promise, but there are many areas where the keepers will open a door for us, and our group will have private time in specific areas. It's just a relaxed, comfortable, we learn, we talk, we share. We learn as much from the groups, the people that come, as they learn from us. And nobody has ever, to this point, ever said that they had anything bad to say about our tours. We have wonderful feedback, and even people that repeat and come back.
Okay. Now, my understanding is that the government there has cordoned off some of the temples, obviously some of the other surrounding pyramids there. Is that still happening there in Egypt?
Yes, this started happening in December, around, when they started closing the pyramids on December 12th and the 21st. I started to see fences. We started to see fences go up, and it's not like you can't go over the fence in some of the areas, but they make it difficult. You actually have to climb over the fence if you want to go to see a certain different area on the plateau. So far, the fences, we can scale them, but it's just kind of odd to start seeing them go up everywhere. Maybe this is, we're not sure. But there are more restrictions. There are certain sites where they strictly forbid, they look for spiritual groups. They classify you as spiritual if you're not your typical mainstream tour. And they really have strictly forbidden things like groups gathering and sitting for quiet meditation. It doesn't make sense, but this is something that's happening. But as I said, there are ways around this in some of the areas. And another thing, you know, and something I didn't mention is when we take people to the sites, we're showing you things. We're discussing symbols. We're discussing the mysteries. We're showing you things that you've probably never heard of or seen before, but then you see it with your own eyes. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, the technologies. We'll show you. Christopher Gunn talks about this. There's statues that we feel are far more ancient than the writings that are on them, where the features in 3D are perfectly symmetrical. Mm-hmm. And that we cannot recreate that with our own technology today. So these are the things that we're looking at and pointing out and talking about. So that's something they can't stop us from dealing with the sites.
Right. Now, have you ever had any unpleasant experiences with the Egyptian Tourism Authority there, not wanting you guys to explore information considered outside the norm? Any unpleasant experiences you guys had there?
At this point, no. Nobody has said anything to us on a personal level from the authorities. It's just at the sites. The restrictions seem to be getting, you know, worse and worse.
Right. Okay. Now, I'm assuming that the school there has explored the interior of the Great Pyramid, right?
Oh, yes. Yeah, we've been in
so
many times.
So what can someone expect to anticipate when they're inside the Great Pyramid? I mean, my understanding is that there's this sense of energy there, especially when they reach the king's chamber.
Well, the entire pyramid is absolutely amazing. From the moment you get off the bus and see it. But yes, when you enter it, and there's three chambers. There's the king's chamber, which is where most people go. And I think the defining that as you go and you climb through the grand gallery, you can feel the resonance, and and I'm talking about sound resonance. And you go into the chamber, you have to duck a little bit before you get into the main king's chamber. And inside, within this chamber, if you were to tone or make noise, you would feel this amazing sound resonance. And then you get into the chamber, and there on the far end of the room, you see this red granite, what they call a sarcophagus. We call it a resonance box. Mm-hmm. And that's all you see in the room. And yet, if you take the time to sit, meditate, tone, and when I say tone, we work with resonant tone. Sometimes we harmonize, but oftentimes we'll work with the resonant tone. And resonant tone has this ability to actually move through dimensions, if that makes sense.
Right.
And this is when people will have visions. We've had crystals. Beautiful Brazilian crystals suddenly have shadows within them and change color or things like that when we do things like this. We actually had a spontaneous healing in December when we were there with a group. One woman had a severe problem with her heel and was even taking pain medication. And as we were toning, she felt a sharp pain, and then it was gone.
Wow.
Totally gone. So, and this happens, I speak of this, but this happens a lot, and not just in the king's chamber. There are several other chambers we'll take people to where there's this amazing ability for sound resonance. And of course, we believe the ancient technologies, part of what they used was sound and water, but so many of these natural elements together to create these fields of energy.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, would you say that there's more hidden knowledge stored or embedded inside the Great Pyramid besides what's been published, let's say in books or professional magazines, architectural magazines? I'm thinking more in the line of information that's possibly being suppressed by the powers that be there.
It has been suppressed, and it's been suppressed for hundreds of years, but definitely, in the past century, the past couple decades. But what we see is more and more information, more and more alternative researchers presenting their theories. And more and more people are able to talk about it openly, at least on Facebook and other arenas. You'll see it in alternative magazines, more people talking about it. And a lot of these theories hold no water in our opinion, but a lot of them do. It's just nice to be able to see them. Yes, there were probably chambers, other chambers in the Great Pyramid and all the pyramids. We know there are multiple chambers in many of the pyramids. Mm-hmm. Did they find things? We hear lots of stories. We hear, I've read so many different accounts of people that went in, or there's a secret door here or there. We don't have positive proof of that. Mm-hmm. But yes, much speculation. But we would say that, one of the things a lot of people don't realize is that all of the pyramids together are connected by an underground series of tunnels and shafts and just wells, and there is a whole world underneath the Giza Plateau that many people aren't even aware exists. They get off the bus and look up, and they don't realize that even most of the Giza Plateau itself, where the pyramids sit, was constructed with large blocks. I mean, it's one huge, amazing working energy device. Mm-hmm. Well, what is not working? Still possibly somewhat active. We still feel the energy, but at one time, an amazing
Right.
network, I would say, of
Uh-huh.
energy devices.
Right. Okay. Now, I mean, when I think of this, I'm thinking quite possibly that the shafts represent some kind of a stargate to another dimension, another reality in alignment with the, certain stars, um, such as, let's say, I believe one of the stars is Sirius. I believe that's a major influence, for ancient Egypt, right? Would you tend to agree with that?
Well, we see many alignments, stellar and solar alignments with the
Hmm.
temples and the monuments. So many of them that you can't say that there was not some connection.
Hmm.
There had to have been a connection with the stars. We know that they were totally absorbed with the movement of the sun and the moon. So yes, definitely there's a reflection. I think they understood that the outer world, the as above, so below, all the way down to ourselves. This is something we see throughout all the symbolism. So there are those that would say that no, that the time that the pyramids were built, we had a whole different, the same stars weren't there. I don't know. We see the connections. We see that there is an alignment. We believe that they had an ability to connect with the energy of the different stars just like we do with the sun.
Hmm.
Why not?
Right. Right. Well, let's see here. I'm also looking at your I subscribe to your news feed here on Facebook, and
Ah,
I find it very fascinating with the information that you share with the public and so forth. One of the questions which has been really in my mind here for quite some time was how the ancients in Egypt embraced death. In our society, we shun it, we fear it, we don't want to talk about it. We push it aside until that moment does happen. And for example, I'll look at a mummy, and the interpretation that I see, it seems as if the mummy is embracing an unknown, perhaps death. Would you feel that this was how the ancients viewed death, as maybe an old friend?
well, here's where I'm going to have to. What I would say is, the indigenous speak of when we talk about ancient Kemet, most of the time we're talking about a time tens of thousands of years ago when all this high technology, we were living in a golden age, probably, and we believe a higher dimensional time. As I say, now we're in third dimension. This was a higher frequency, higher dimension, less dense atmosphere. And a people that really didn't use words to communicate because they understood each other through frequency. So that particular culture that built these amazing monuments, we're told and we believe that they never even had a term for death. They understood the cycles. They understood that everything cycles. They didn't have a word for death. They would have called it resting. And the Egyptians here, the very ancient Egyptians here, called it resting. They didn't call it, have a word for like death. Like we see death as the end, whereas they just saw it as a new beginning. It's a cycle into something different.
Hmm.
And we believe that as we fell into this darker cycle, and Hakim talked about 5 cycles, and they likened them to the stages of the sun. But this particular cycle, he would have called the stage of Amen or Amun. And we would say that the priests of Amun began, it's almost like they began telling lies or manipulating the people in order to create what Hakim would have said, harvestless jobs for themselves. It's like they create the term death, and we become afraid, and as you said, we fear death, we're afraid of death. We push it aside. Well, they create this aura that death is something to be feared,
Hmm.
and then they create the process, of giving you, that promise of sanctuary at death if you go through these steps. Well, they create the idea of mummification. They create, that you have to be buried with all your gold. Well, who do you think the first grave robbers were? the
Right.
priests. They were
Right.
the only ones that knew where it was and had the key.
Mm-hmm.
So, in our opinion, that's the twist. That death is something final, when in reality there is no such thing. Everything, and that's why they liken it to the stages of the sun, the stars, the sun. They move through the sky. They rise in the east and they set in the west. That's why they call it westing, only to rise again with the beginning of a new cycle.
Right. Right. Well, in that same line of reasoning, do you believe that the Egyptian civilization was set in motion by a much more highly advanced civilization? I'm thinking in the line of Atlantis.
Well, I don't like the term Atlantis. I think it's a label that has so many images, visions, writings about it that it places the whole concept of this ancient civilization in too many boxes.
Mm-hmm.
So the label itself I'm not fond of, but I do think there was a civilization that, as we talked about, living during a golden age that had this high technology and left all of this for us. And yes, we would say that like Old Kingdom Egypt, like the oldest history we have, we would say they inherited what this ancient culture had created. And maybe there was a cataclysm or something, but there's a division, an obvious division between the two civilizations. Just as we view Atlantis, we see, it's sort of like that same view. But then this ancient civilization inherits it. So the sites haven't been quarried yet. They haven't been taken apart. They haven't been destroyed. Mm-hmm. So they inherited these sites that were still, I'm sure, very active energetically, and were able to utilize that energy.
Okay. Well, what about the ET influence? There's some speakers out there, people who are on the lecture circuit who discuss the ET influence in ancient civilizations. When one, let's say, goes to Egypt, you're pretty much in awe as to how something as grand as the Great Pyramid was constructed, the huge stones weighing, tons, the temples. So it's kind of hard really to really digest what academia has been, feeding us, that they used, slave labor, or they used their people there to construct these temples. And in a way, I think that you hinted sound and sound frequencies. Could sound frequencies have been used to levitate these stones into place? And in conjunction with that, would you tend to accept the belief that possibly ETs aided in constructing, let's say, something as magnificent as the Great Pyramid of Egypt?
Well, Hakim would say absolutely not. And I would say, okay, you use the term ET. Most people say alien. And ET would mean extraterrestrial, so from another star, planet, or something like that.
Right.
And my feeling is, just from the basis of your question, we see things that we can't possibly create today. Mm-hmm. But again, we're looking at them through a three-dimensional current cultural perspective. And so we can't conceive of it because of the nature of the reality we exist in. However, if we do cycle through golden and dark ages, and we would say that right now we are in a darker age of Amun, what if we cycle into a higher dimensional age? And what if, as we move higher and higher, we come to a stage where we're in higher dimensionality, everything is less dense? Then everything we see before us, we can't even imagine how it would have been created. Mm-hmm. We look at 3D. We can take something into certain dimensions. We know that, we see a line as two-dimensional and a globe is three-dimensional. And then we take that, we might be able to perceive a fourth or a fifth or a sixth dimension. But when, I ask someone, can they imagine, what a globe looks like in 7 dimensions, or what we can't even conceive or perceive what it might be. So it would be impossible for us to totally understand how they created it. We're just seeing the results of it.
Right.
So and I would also have to say that our ETs, as described by those that have supposedly come in contact, seem to be able to move through dimensions.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're multidimensional, then why would, to me you're talking, we believe time and space are illusions. And when we talk about ETs or aliens, you're creating a them and us scenario. When I believe that, we're the people that built the pyramids, but maybe we built them from in a higher dimensional reality.
Okay. Now, this is something which I wanted to ask someone like you who's out there in the field. Have you ever touched upon why some of the Egyptian gods and goddesses are anthropomorphic in appearance? That's been something which has always been curious about for me. I mean, the Greeks have their gods and goddesses. They're human appearing. But some of the cultures out there in the Middle East, but particularly ancient Egypt, their gods and goddesses are anthropomorphic in nature. And have you ever touched upon that? And would a stretch to the imagination point to extraterrestrials?
Well, first, I will say no. But the reason why, and this is from the indigenous, and believe it or not, now Egyptologists have actually announced the same, that we do not believe that the Egyptian gods and goddesses, as we've been told they are, the Isis, Osiris, Horus, they were not to be worshipped, originally to be worshipped as gods and goddesses, but they were called netters. And netter is a root word for nature, nurture, eternal. They were actually forces of nature. There were 360 or 365 of them, and each one represented a force of nature or a cosmic force, but on many different levels. Isis would represent Sirius, but she could also represent motherhood. She could, so many different levels. But she was not meant to be an icon or this super being that people were to become priests. This all came later. The mystery schools and the priestesses and all this came with the priesthood that was manipulating the people. But prior to that, these were representations of something much of our universe, as above, so below. So as representations of a higher dimensionality even of all the different possibilities of reality, then of course they could shapeshift. They could, you know what I'm saying? And I'd also point out that the ancients had an intense connection with nature. Intense. When they would study, like we go to school and we study, a crocodile, and we might understand what the crocodile eats and what the crocodile, where his habitat is or whatever. But the ancients studied the crocodile. They would know every detail about what the crocodile does. And then when they utilize that as a symbol, it has so much more, multi-level meaning. And again, as I said, you look at this from so many different perspectives, but we have we're so narrow-minded when we look at things. And when I study the symbols and what they mean, they just haven't, and this is why they use nature as these symbols, because symbols is a language.
Right.
A symbol can tell you more than a word, and words are symbols.
Right. Well, what about the connection to Mars? Have you ever run any reference to the planet Mars and any ancient Egyptian material besides the fact that I think the city was founded when the planet was rising? Because I believe Cairo means Mars in Arabic, right?
It does. It supposedly means the victorious or whatever. There's a connection with Horus. Horus has always been connected to Mars. But again, the city was named in, I think, like around 1000, just before 1000 AD. So you're talking a culture that was very, very different from the ancient culture.
Okay, so you think there's just no connection whatsoever between, let's say, the pyramids in Cydonia and the pyramids in Egypt? You think that's just coincidence, or is there a connection there?
I would say that there may be many connections, but I would question the information being presented. So, as I said, there's always a reflection from the cosmos, always, absolutely. And as you know, and I would point out that yes, Isis definitely has a connection to Sirius. We know this. They related Sirius was a star that was very important to the ancients. So yes, they did make these correlations.
Okay, well, what about the concept of, quote unquote, forbidden archaeology? My understanding is that there exists somewhere in Egypt, deeply buried underground, these humongous sarcophagi. They're huge. I think they're about, what, 10 feet or maybe 15 feet
Oh, they're
long?
gigantic.
They're huge. And uh, there's just no reference of them, other than those who really are, challenging the status quo. And one person who comes to mind is, Carmen Bolter. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so, what's your opinion on this? I mean, was there a reason why these sarcophagi exist deeply buried in Egypt?
Absolutely. Firstly, we're talking about the Serapeum, which is at the site of Saqqara, and has just been opened to the public this past September. And one interesting thing I'll note is Yousef and I were at the grand opening, and they had a press conference. And the engineer that actually had done the restoration project stood up and spoke, and he himself said that there was no way, he could not explain how the Serapeum existed, because there is no explanation. These boxes are huge, and they're made of heavy, heavy black granite and other material, red granite, but they exist in these little chambers that flank both sides of a long. There's two hallways, but they're on either side, and they're in these small rooms. And so the archaeologists that say that 1,000 or 10,000 men would pull these heavy blocks. Well, there's no room to pull these blocks in up against a wall. So how did they get them down there?
Right.
Or whether they made them there, or whether and the construction themselves. Some of these, there's one that you can walk down and touch and everything, and the finish on it is so smooth you can see yourself. You take pictures and there's a mirror reflection. It's just amazing technology. And they like to say that these were built for Apis bowls, and of course no bowls were found in any of them. But in our opinion, this is an area at Saqqara where, again, as I said before, all of these pyramids in this long strip that Stephen Mailer calls the Land of Osiris, but they're all connected by underground tunnels and shafts. And this is all part of that complex. This isn't just one pyramid working as an energy device, but many. And we see this area as part of it, as maybe it was like a battery or some sort of capacitor, but together these items could have worked as part of the energy device. Or many people have said, yes, maybe something was going on within the boxes, that it was for some sort of interdimensional bringing matter in, or transporting matter, or something else out. These are the answers the questions we can't answer. In fact, oftentimes we find more questions than we do answers, but at least we're willing to talk about it.
So the public is pretty much just it's not allowed to even venture there, right?
To where?
Well, visiting that area there that's been.
Oh, it has opened. It just opened in September, and we've been taking all our groups there. Absolutely, the public can go, and yet when we go, almost no one's ever there. It's amazing.
Huh.
Just absolutely amazing. But to go there, I actually call the Serapeum the largest smoking gun on the planet, because if you actually go down and look at these boxes and see them with your own eyes,
Right.
you can't help but know that something huge, a higher civilization had to have created it.
Right. Well, I want to touch upon the Sphinx here. If I understand it, there was a sighting, a reference by Edgar Casey, excuse me, that he had cited that the records of Atlantis were to be found in the, I believe, in the Paul the Sphinx. Uh, has there been any allusion towards that discovery?
Well, there's lots written about it. Lots of people have theories. I've seen diagrams of chambers under the Sphinx. We know that there's chambers under the Sphinx. We know that, again, there's tunnels and shafts. We know this. However, Hakim would have said that if there's a hall of records, it's within. That all the answers, we have everything within. Everything reflected outside of ourselves we find within. But does that mean that could there be another physical or multidimensional hall of records? Absolutely, that's a possibility. But there are areas like the labyrinth that's under the sands near the pyramid at Hawara, at the Fayum Oasis. This labyrinth was described by Herodotus as something, even more amazing than the pyramids. Was this an area where there were, that would be halls of records? But even what they left for us with these amazing monuments that we can't explain, is that our hall of records? But I would always say, if something was found, maybe it was taken, maybe, it's being kept somewhere. If you're looking for a tablet with writing on it, I don't believe that's the hall of records or what is being described. I really would say that the answers are always within. We don't have to look outside of ourselves.
Right. Okay, well, I want to touch upon the artistry of ancient Egypt, the artisans, the ones who helped paint the temples and so forth. I'm looking at one of the news feeds that you send out to subscribers here, and one of them depicts an image of Nui. I think that's the way it's pronounced, correct? Nui?
No, I'm not sure what you mean.
Oh, well, there's an image of Nui representing the sky during the day.
Newt, okay.
Wait,
Okay.
I was
Sorry
kind of
about that.
yeah, on the ceiling of Dendera. And I'm looking at the coloring scheme, and you kind of wonder, did they have anything to illuminate the ceiling or the walls to, paint these? Because I'm looking at the intricacy that's involved in painting, the artwork.
That's amazing.
It's amazing.
It's so beautiful. We don't believe in the light bulb theory, although we never had the Baghdad battery and those kind of things. But we believe their technologies were natural. They were using natural elements, and this is the alchemy. They understood how to use the elements to do everything they needed to do. And again, I don't know, because of course the Dendera temple was supposedly built during Ptolemaic times. We believe they quarried a much older temple of Dendera, and some of that was used in this structure we see today. But they could have done. Very good question.
Yeah, because when I a while back I had gone to see the exhibit of King Tut, Tutankhamun.
Yeah.
And I was amazed at the fine artwork that was used to assemble the furniture, the head mask, and
amazing.
it's amazing. And most people in Egypt, or I should say most people maybe in our country, in America, the United States, when we think of ancient Egypt or any ancient civilization, we don't take into account the fact that the people were excellent, in this case, craftsmen. Um, you look at the artwork and you just sit in awe.
Yes.
When you look at, let's say, the head mask of Tutankhamun, the artwork that was put into that, the gold, um, the furniture, and we
Oh,
have,
so?
yeah, we have a backwards mentality that, oh, well, these were just, people who lived like thousands of years ago. So when you look at the finished product of something that was constructed, maybe 2,500 years ago, 3,000 years ago, um, it pretty much arouses your curiosity to explore further, you know?
Well, it did for me,
Yeah,
for sure.
I mean, nobody really wants to touch upon the artistry of ancient Egypt, you know?
Well, that's what blew me away. Exactly the same thing, Martin. When I would go through, my first trip here, I'd go through the temples and I'd see these things and wonder why the Egyptologist tour guide wasn't addressing, oh my gosh, look at this. You're saying this culture lived 3,000, 4,000 years ago, and they created this.
Yeah.
To me, it was just beyond explanation.
Yeah, it really, really amazes me. Now, I want to ask you something here. In your field of work, have you ever encountered, let's say, a phenomenon that really escaped any explanation for you? And if so, can you give an example or some examples here?
Well, we do see a lot of things that we can't explain. As I even said, with our 3D minds, I look at things and I just even as I said, the statues that are in 3D and are perfectly symmetrical, made out of hard materials like diorite or granite, pink or red granite, black granite. You see them and you see. I'm an artist. And I paint, and I can, on 2 dimensions, I can't do perfect symmetry. So how were they able to do this? And carving, no less. I mean, that's something my only answer would be, yes, it has to be through another, a totally different dimensionality of existence, of reality.
Mm-hmm. I mean, like, have you ever encountered anything that really, well, we touched upon the sarcophagi there,
Yes.
Egypt, but let's say anything that really escaped any rational thinking for anyone there. I mean, I guess I'm focusing, or in this case, leading towards the forbidden archaeology.
Well, there's so much here. There's so much. I mean, we look at the mud brick pyramids that most people dismiss.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, they don't even bother to go look at them. And we usually get the whole sites to ourselves. But the mud brick pyramids, now first of all, there was casing stone that was quarried and taken away.
Yeah.
But today, you can't build a mud brick pyramid that's more than a few meters high and have it stay intact. And yet they have these huge structures that they built, and they're still standing, even though their casing stones were taken away. Nobody can explain that. That's forbidden archaeology. In Hawara, when Petrie went inside the Hawara pyramid for the first time, and he talked about entering a room, and he said, there were no doors, no nothing, there's a chamber, and then he found a sliding door in the ceiling, okay? Now, this pyramid now has a canal that was built next to it with water, so you can't go inside it today. But inside, he described finding the main chamber where there was a huge chamber made out of, he said, yellow transparent quartzite. Well, to me, he's describing citrine. Now, how does one, and this block is huge, it's like at least 8 by 10 feet by, and 2-foot thick walls, and he said with perfect, perfect corners, high technology, how does one, first of all, where does one find a block that big?
Right.
And how, and how does one create this chamber? And then it had a ceiling, that had 3 big pieces of yellow quartzite. And, he just goes on to describe this amazing chamber that, again, there's no explanation. It baffles, and we find that these descriptions, these things everywhere. I mean, how did they get these boxes down into these subterranean chambers? There's the Osiris shaft right here on the Giza Plateau. 3 levels, and at the bottom level is there's a sarcophagus there that is made of a material that isn't even found in Egypt.
That's fascinating.
So it is.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, we are approaching the end of the first hour, Patricia. Would you care to remind any of our listeners of the website, and does the school have any planned tours for this year, for 2013? I'm noticing a link on the website here, and there is a tour itinerary, and it looks awesome here. I'm looking at the photos and the dates and the places, and I'm like, wow, this would be a place to go.
Well, yes, April 15th to the 28th of this year. It's only about 6, 7, 8 weeks away. Right. We are presenting and hosting a very unique event there'll be 6 speakers that include Yousef and I. We are hosting featuring speakers Stephen Mailer, who was a close friend and student of Hakim's, who he wrote 2 books with. And Christopher Dunn, which most people are familiar with, wrote Giza Power Plant. And Stephen, by the way, wrote Land of Osiris and From Light into Darkness with Hakim. And Christopher Dunn, as I said, and who also wrote Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt. Brian Forster, who is doing the same work that we're doing here in Egypt in Peru, and is just presenting amazing information and things to people about what he's finding in the pre-Incan Empire in Peru, the same kind of technologies that they're finding there. So he's going to come along and help, we'll be comparing and contrasting what we see in both countries. And then Gary Evans of Infinite Connections PR, who has done a lot of spiritual work, has been to several of the sites. He's been on tour with us before in December and has been here individually, and he just will be an amazing asset to the group as well. So this is going to be a unique one, probably one-of-a-time adventure, and we're really excited.
That's great. And you can find all this on the website, which is www.khemitology.com, correct?
Yes, and I will say, unfortunately, our site was taken down a couple of weeks ago. We don't know if it was malicious or not, but we've been told it was because everything's gone, the archives and everything. So we're in the process of rebuilding. We see it as something, a new start, something to be able to create something new. But in the meantime, we're just starting to get the pages back up again and the information, and we're going to make some changes. But yes, we do have our homepage, travel page up. And it is KHEMITOLOGY.com.
Great. Do you have any closing comments for any listeners out there on ancient Egypt and Khemitology, Patricia?
Oh, I would only say that if anything we've been talking about interests you or resonates with you, we'd love to hear from you, to meet you. If you're on Facebook, look us up. We really do have a wonderful and active page, and it's just called the Khemit School of Ancient Mysticism. And if you're ever in Egypt, just knock on the door. The door's always open, and we love to meet people.
Awesome. Well, it was a great pleasure speaking to you, Patricia. And for any of our listeners, I encourage you to go to the website, holisticadvocate.com, and subscribe to listen to the second hour with this fascinating interview with Patricia Awyan.
Thanks, Martin. It's been great to...
Okay, thank you, Patricia. I'll talk to you later, okay?
All right, thank you.
That's it for the first hour on As Above, So Below Radio. Tune in for the second hour by subscribing to holisticadvocate.com, where Patricia will further discuss the divine feminine and what roles the prominent goddesses had in the developing civilization of ancient Egypt, Horus, and its use by the ancient Egyptians, and the use of sound the ancient Egyptians applied in constructing their monuments and temples, and much more. You're listening to As Above, So Below Radio.